Sorry, I'm just disabling some of my stream stuff so it doesn't appear on Paradox's end. It's the difficulty of being live in two different places.
That's okay. I don't blame you. I'm sure that it is more of a struggle than than most will realize. In the meantime, though, I'm just going to keep clicking through nations because I'm curious if they have learned. Like I said before, this is not the first day. Obviously, we're playing in the finals. These teams have already played 2 games before this, and I've seen a lot of progression from both sides throughout the series. And I just want to see if they've actually learned from their mistakes, if they've taken better focus paths. So far, I think Germany and the USSR are pretty much mirroring each other. Germany's waiting for, I assume, 4-year plan? He just got the treaty, so yep, he'll be starting his research now. I think we're going to see this change in 1 second. Obviously, as Germany, you get the treaties with the USSR. You want to make use of that to get your heavy tanks faster.
Yep.
A really big a big step up for Germany is that they have those 2 bonuses. They've got one from treaty with the USSR, another from Army Innovations 2, which they can use to rush tanks ahead of time. And there you go. We've got Tiger 2s being queued for Germany, as expected.
752 days only.
Yep, they're actually 30 days behind the USSR, who are currently 720 days away from getting their KV-1s. Which I believe they got a bonus for as well. I actually don't remember.
No, I'm curious to see what other people are researching. Keep looking at Greece, even though Greece is not a player.
I mean, one thing that I was surprised by is that a lot of players have been using... what have they been using? They've been using Concentrated on the Allies. Or sorry, Dispersed a lot on the Allies, especially the Kaiserreich team. I've been seeing... Essentially, like, all of them have been using nothing but Dispersed Industry. Now, a key difference between Dispersed Industry and Concentrated Industry is that Dispersed Industry gets you more equipment in the short term, but it flattens out sooner. Whereas the total efficiency cap, which means that your factories or how hard your factories are working, or that's the measurement of how hard they're working, you get more out of that long term with Concentrated. And the Allies really have, well, in previous matches, seem to focus a lot on getting dispersed so that they could do more damage early. Like, they really do like being prepared for D-Day early, which is not a bad idea, and they've been coordinating it very well as a team.
That's one of the things I've definitely seen from the previous 2 sessions. The most vulnerable point the Allies have does actually seem to be Moscow, because Paris almost always falls, which means the target for the entire Axis team is just Moscow. There's a very little reason for America to actually go after Japan and the East if Moscow is under threat. Do you think the Allies are going to have any way of countering that this time? Have they done anything particular for that in the games you've seen?
I mean, truth be told, the co-prosperity sphere really have... Well, essentially, it's up to them to do something in the East to distract the Allies. And that really depends on how well coordinated your co-prosperity sphere team is, how well they do in their China grind, like if they get the right generals, and just how their general setup goes. Like, I've seen a lot of games for the co-prosperity sphere, at the very least, just die without them having any impact whatsoever because they couldn't break through the Dhaka line in the Raj, or they couldn't invade the Philippines or the Dutch East Indies or whatever. So for the Allies, my advice to them is you obviously want to make sure that your Raj sets up a good defense against the Copro. You want to make sure that Malaya is well defended, but don't overcommit. Don't overcommit to the Asia side unless it's necessary. At the end of the day, it is indeed, like you said, Moscow is is under way more threat than usually any other place is. And the key for any allied team to take pressure off of Moscow is just like they did in real life, naval invade somewhere and get the attention of the German tanks or whatever tanks the Axis have and pull it towards you, because otherwise the Russians are always at risk of just getting overrun. Like, it's happened so many times now that the Allies either overcommitted to Asia or just didn't fight hard enough for Europe and ended up either A, getting sea line, B, losing Africa, or C, just not being able to have any impact on time.
Yeah, and I've seen that time and time again for myself, and I think that's part of the reason why this particular Axis team is so dangerous, because they're so good at invading Russia. Like having Shadow with his tanks putting the pressure on the Russian front line, and then Italy just doing their shenanigans attacking through Archangel, makes it really difficult for Russia to respond to all of these threats going off at the same time. And the Allies just haven't found a counter for that yet.
No, they have not. And actually got a question from chat. Somebody asked, what's the point of grinding in Ethiopia if Germany does everything? That's the key, though. There have been teams that indeed relied on either just Germany or just the USSR, and those are the teams that are not here today. Like we pointed out before, these teams have been really showing the fact that teamwork makes the dream work, and they are more than willing to invest in all nations rather than just try to boost a certain amount of players and getting them to carry the game for you. And these Italy players, I should say, have shown that they are more than capable of pulling off some very unconventional tactics, making them work, and that's why getting a double adaptable for them is pretty important. You never know when it might come in handy to have some really good generals.
And we've seen Italy come in and save the day on multiple occasions. Like in the first game, and I still can hardly believe this, National Spain almost lost the civil war. They were down to just the Galicia province. Everything else had fallen to the Republicans. And it wasn't until the Italians finished with Ethiopia and sent volunteers that situation changed. Ultimately, it changed completely when the Russians had to pull out and start the Winter War, which basically meant it was just AI with no Soviets. But until then, it really did look like National Spain was just going to lose, and they would be down a player. Kind of like in the second game when Mexico lost their civil war and lost a player because of it.
I still remember the Italy player coming to me after the game and telling me about it, and I'm not gonna lie, I had a good laugh about it. It was certainly an ingenious strategy that they used to harass the Mexico player into losing a civil war. But now that we were talking about it, and it's still early days, like we don't really have any indication of who's going to win. Predictions time, and I'm going to ask my mods if they can make a prediction in chat. I wanted to ask you, who do you predict is going to win? What do you think is going to happen this game?
And while that's happening, chat just told me that the Spanish Civil War has begun. It has, in fact. We've got Bulgarians, Japanese, and German volunteers in National Spain. And then we have got the Soviets already in Republican, with attaches from India, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the USSR, and Britain.
Yep, just the usual, getting their war support up so they can get their economy laws. You'll notice that the Brits have immediately gone to partial mode. This is a strategy I really like. You grab you obviously grab the Spain attaché, you go to partial mode. You'll have to play it careful for a while because there will be dips in your war support, but as the UK you can remedy this with a few focuses, one of them being the focus to, where is it? The home defense, which gives you 5% war support, and then there is also the Burma Road, which gives you another 5%, which allows you to just skirt that requirement and get partial mode from the start of the game. The trade-off is, you can't really go for the early elusive gentleman, but then again, it's not really that useful without tech stealing. And also, you'll note that the UK is on export focus and not on free trade, which is because I assume they don't have the political power for it, and they don't. Okay. But that question was also posed to you. Who do you think is going to win? Like, what do you think is going to happen, Mordred?
I don't know. I mean, I've seen so many good things happen from the Axis team that my money is behind them. But then again, I also really know a lot about Kaiserreich Weekly. I was going to say I feel like the Axis may know the game better, but actually they're both mod communities. That's not necessarily true. I think in some ways it kind of depends on which game is more different meta-wise than their mods. I suspect Kaiserreich Weekly would be.
I suspect so.
Yeah.
I think so too. I've played Ablaze and I can tell you that it's a little different from vanilla, more so than Kaiserreich. Like Kaiserreich does retain a lot of the mechanics that we know, and I know that Ablaze a lot of like custom events and custom spirits and things like that really change the game from what we know. But I also feel like you're right in the way that I feel like both teams have had enough practice, running through the first two games, that they are fairly evenly matched. And I have some personal difficulties here, really, selecting a team because I do have two friends playing in this game. I'm not gonna lie, I might be a little biased here, but I've seen a lot from Kaiserreich Weekly, and I think that Zobertus is gonna carry them all the way. It's gonna be the Bob Semples that win the game. Has to be.
It's gonna be the Bob Semples against the Italian infantry. Interesting. So I'm already seeing one difference in tactics from the Axis here, and that is Germany has actually sent tanks to Spain. It's the first time they've done that. Previously, it's always been infantry.
I love it. I just actually tagged over to Italy, and I just noticed the doctrine they're doing, and I think we're going to see some wonderful things here, and I think I wouldn't want to be the driver of any of those light tanks running into Mass Assault Italy here. That's...
Mass Assault Italy is the way to go. Like, I've played a couple of multiplayer games recently as Italy, and Mass Assault Italy, it's really potent. Like, it's dangerous.
I mean, on the one hand, you've got... You've got Mass Assault Italy being very good defensively, but it does always kind of it kind of flunks out when it comes to the offense side of things. So when you do have a mass assault Italy, you will find that you're reliant on the other players to actually go on the offense, at least on the ground. Like, I don't know what they're going to do Navy-wise. And yes, as you guys said, Italy indeed got Ethiopia annexed. It seems like he was late to the war, or to end the war, rather.
February 37, yeah, I wasn't even watching that. Yes, you're right.
I mean, the debuff that they get from it is essentially, I don't know if it's an area debuff. I don't believe they get an area debuff. I think it's just the fact that they get super low compliance, and if you make it a puppet, the land is a little more useful. So that obviously is the mistake.
So Ethiopia compliance right now is 6%, so yeah, that Ethiopian territory is going to be a bit of a thorn in their side. But as we have mass assault Italy, I don't think that worrying about compliance is going to be so bad, because the biggest downside of having low compliance is losing a lot of manpower and equipment.
Yeah, with that 5% recruitable population, modifier coming in with the fact that Italy already has so much manpower to begin with, especially if they go extensive. Khan, obviously right now they're unlimited, but once they go extensive, they just have that 10%, and then, additional spirits and things come in. Italy has a lot of manpower, and especially with that mass assault doctrine, they're just going to be having a good time. I don't think Italy's going to be lacking manpower at all throughout this game. I mean, they're literally going to have to be down to the last province before that's going to make any difference.
Yeah, and Italy actually has some kind of hidden roles, because in the previous game to this, Germany was losing 800,000 manpower per year to unrest. And Italy just lent them the garrisons, and then suddenly that's not a problem for Germany anymore.
Yeah, and that, even though you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, is still very important to keep the Germany players healthy. Germany, at the end of the day, is going to be the main provider of tanks for the Axis. At the very least, they're line tanks. Now, I'm not talking about like some Bulgarian light tanks or whatever. You can't really rely on them to battle the enemy tanks. Like, you're going to need your own heavies or mediums for that. And a healthy Germany is a strong Germany, and that's exactly what you want if you're on the Axis side. You do not want to lose out on any production efficiency to the USSR.
So we've just had the Regional Defence Council of Aragon rising up. I don't think it's going to cause many real problems. I've seen it before where a large chunk of the Republican forces are just cut off, and I've even seen it where the entire Soviet volunteer force gets cut off and destroyed. But this time, I think they got away with it quite lightly. Oh, and we have a Mexican civil war as well.
Yeah, the Mexicans have been very good about getting their civil wars. At the end of the day, it's good. Although it might look like a mistake for a lot of players, this is actually good for them, because it's the only opportunity they're going to get to grind any generals before the war. And just to go back to the Spanish Civil War for a moment, something that's actually interesting is, in the first few games, what I noticed is that the Axis were either very lucky or very good about getting their Regional Defense Council spawns, or Carlis spawns in the south, and this time it actually spawned in Barcelona, and they really have no gain from it. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody lost any divisions here. I think placement was very good on both ends, and yeah, I mean, the Soviets might get trapped if the Axis decide to do something about it, but I think this is all... Nope, this is actually open. Oh, it seems like there are no more modifiers in these provinces. There's no unplanned offensive, so they might be able to trap them here, but I doubt it.
No, I don't think so. There's Soviet mountaineers there holding the potential corridors, and I think they'll be just fine. And the Spanish and German units are attacking across rivers. Yeah, I don't think they're going to have a problem.
I mean, at the end of the day, they're just doing that for their engineer traits, which Mr. Ewald von Kleist is not quite close enough to yet. But yeah, no, it doesn't seem like they want to pounce on the Soviets. And the Soviets are very good about creating some more space for themselves so that they don't have to worry about getting cut off when one tile gets taken. It does seem like the Germans are interested in keeping them pinned, but nah, they're backing off. They're backing off. They don't think they want to have any of this. They just want to get their trades and move on.
So this is something that Germany has consistently been doing in this, is they have not been using field marshals. They've only been using generals, which I personally think is a mistake. I love field marshals. I love the extra traits and things they give. But what I understand is if you have just the general, they get more experience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and what they're doing is they're obviously training these generals to ultimately turn them into field marshals. Sorry, I was going to TTS. Thank you, guys. But, I mean, at the end of the day, for the Spanish Civil War, it doesn't really matter, because the point here isn't really winning battles. The point here is grinding those generals and getting the XP. So, you know, if this means that you can get more XP in your generals, be more precise about it, and then end up promoting them to field marshals, you get the, you know, the expected end result anyway, and you prepare yourself better for World War II. And I think that's the, you know, that's the key here. Spanish Civil War is only a sideshow, really, in that regard.
Yeah, and actually, I think that is what I would consider Germany's biggest weakness, is I don't think their general management is the best. They're very good with the tanks, they're very good with the micro, but the generals, I always feel like they're underutilising them. Like Manteuffel right now is their second general with 2 soldiers. I've seen them grind him and then just not use him later at all.
I mean, it could be that they're trying to save some generals for certain situations. Like one big thing, it's actually key. You know, a lot of players, if they're playing France, they feel safe behind the Maginot line, right? Like, you know, level 10 forts, like, you're good, like, nobody's going to come through there. And then they end up grabbing a little general whose name is this is so bad, but I always forget what he's called. Manstein, sorry. You know, they grab Manstein, and he's got this lovely little trait. It's called Engineer. And what Engineer allows you to do is get Fortress Buster, which gives you siege artillery. And what a lot of players do is they don't even bother trading Manstein. They just grab him, put him on the Maginot line, they activate the button siege artillery, and then they just waltz on through. And then you've got some French people looking, you know, pretty surprised, scared, and you know, just filled with dread at the fact that German tanks are not driving into the French heartland. I mean, it does happen, and there are occasions for which you can train generals for very specific reasons. At the end of the day, if you already got the traits you want, you know, why bother to keep training them?
Yeah, and that's actually exactly what I saw in the first game. Is they went through Maginot and France capitulated before the Netherlands or Belgium.
Oh yeah, no, 100%, 100%. It's something that you usually see the more experienced players do, because they just have full confidence in their ability to micro their tanks and, you know, outwit the enemy. And they try to use the confusion of it all to kind of just throw the enemy off. And honestly, I've seen games or I've been in games where it was easier to drive through the Maginot than to drive through the region of Picardy. Mm-hmm. You know, the easiest way to defend France, if it comes to the northern line, so, you know, from the Belgian border, is actually not to stand on the border, but to hold the forest tiles behind around the river next to Amiens. And honestly, I've seen people struggle harder trying to break through that line than they were trying to break through the Maginot. So in certain situations, I would advocate going through the Maginot rather than trying to go through Belgium.
Well, it was definitely the right thing to do in that game, because it just completely threw the French player. He didn't know how to respond to it. All of his defences were further north.
Yep, and that's why it's so strong. And an even stronger tactic, and once again, this really relies on your faith more so in your own micro, and the understanding of timing. Now, we spoke about this before. This is the fact that the United States is allowed to lend-lease airplanes to Canada, which is usually the Allied air controller, before the fall of France. What this means is that they can get like they can build this massive amount of airplanes and send them over to the United Kingdom, and then Canada can operate them from the United Kingdom and just obliterate units on the field with CAS. So one really good strategy that I've observed some players utilize this tourney is actually not kill Poland, or at least not, you know, attacking them at the start, but rather lining up your tanks at the Maginot and using that 30-day gap that you have where the Allies don't have that additional attack bomber support to actually rush Paris then. And I would encourage, because I've seen the Allied players do this multiple times now, they have this strategy down. Like, they know what they're doing with those attack bombers. I really hope that the German players have thought of this and they send those tanks in early, or we might actually see a very prolonged battle for France.
I kind of hope to see that, because so far every time France has just fallen like a bit of a wet blanket, with England following soon after in one of those cases. But yeah, I would say that Kaiserreich Weekly playing as the Allies, they are used to having a strong France, and they are used to having a France who can actually hold. And I wouldn't be that surprised if they're going to be in that same mindset to try and keep France, if they can. Yeah,
Kaiserreich has been fighting tooth and nail for France. They were actually playing the Allies in the first game that I casted, and they held France. In fact, they voluntarily abandoned it to give the other team a game to play, which I admire. Like, you know, in terms of sportsmanship, it was amazing to see. They actually retreated. They ended up winning the game anyway, but they did give the opponent a chance to actually come in and play. But obviously, I don't think we're going to see anything like that tonight. Tonight, we're playing for the win, and I think both these teams are going to go, you know, the absolute length and just try whatever they can in order to best their opponents. But that being said, I sincerely hope that we don't see a prolonged battle for France, because that usually means that Germany is considerably weakened in their fight against the Soviets, which could ultimately spell their doom. And I am really looking forward to Barbarossa and seeing what the Axis will bring to bear there.
Me too. Like, I'm very much expecting the usual heavy tank attack into Barbarossa. Italy is always going to be a bit of a weird one. Italy will do other things, as well as supporting Germany. And I want to see what the USA does. I think the USA, in both the games I've seen so far, has not done enough. And I'd very much like to see the US being a bit more proactive this time around.
I agree with you there, and I've already noticed a massive mistake on the side of the US player. Now, one key thing is the US is one of the main tank nations for the Allies. Now, they do come into the war very late, but one of the, obviously US is a major part of D-Day and eventually landing in France, and an important part of that is two specific key types of units. They want to get the LVTs and they want to get the heavy tanks. And I actually played against this very US player yesterday, and I gave him some feedback, and I see that he hasn't followed it because we are not looking at day one research of heavy tanks, and that is a massive, massive misplay on the US, and they really need to get on the heavy tank research as soon as possible so they can transition into the M6A1 and then grab the Focus, tank experiments to get their 100% boost and then use that on the heavy threes. Those US heavy threes are an absolute necessity for the Allies to be able to land. And I've just seen way too much license production in that regard. Like, they've been licensing from the Soviets, and you know that there's a base 25% reduction in the production efficiency if you license, and when you license it from a different faction, it gets increased even further, and it just means that the US has less tanks to field, and they really can't get away with that. The Allies need that, and so does the USSR. Like, sure, they appreciate the 6 extra civs, but that doesn't help them when D-Day doesn't land or isn't able to stay there once they've landed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep on saying this. I think that Moscow is the big problem here. I actually kind of feel like the rule set for this game would be better if the victory point was further back, like Magnitogorsk in the Urals, because that would give the Soviets a bit more time and give the Allies a bit more time to actually react. I'm kind of wondering if the American play here, because you want to build up the Soviets early, is to lend-lease those tanks to the Soviets and not actually build them themselves.
The problem with that is, even if you... lend-leasing tanks to the Soviets does help them in the short term, but ultimately it actually is not beneficial for them in the long term. At the end of the day, yes, Barbarossa is for the most part a war of attrition unless you get your tanks right-clicked and circled and deleted. But like we said before as well, it's key for the Allies to distract the Germans as much as possible. You want to make sure that there's a threat for the Germans to, be wary of. You want to make sure that they have to send tanks to the Western Front, in order to preempt D-Day and be able to kick it back into the sea once they've landed. And because the US has been doing a lot of this lend-leasing and providing the Soviets with more tanks, which they're more than capable of building themselves, by the way, because almost every Soviet built this tournament has been a no-air build, which means that they're, investing everything into tanks. It's just been a major misplay from the Allies, in my opinion, that they haven't been, preparing themselves, to get these D-Days, to be able to stick them, and then actually be able to threaten the German homeland.
And chat just asked me how's the naval setup for the various different nations, and I'm seeing Germany and Italy have their navies in order. They've already organised them. The UK hasn't yet. And one of the weaknesses I definitely know is true for Kaiserreich Weekly is their naval game leaves a lot to be desired.
I certainly hope that the USA is not going to be licensing the Bob Semple, but somebody in chat just mentioned. I have actually noticed Kaiserreich Weekly license building the big Bobs. I've noticed Russia license building it in past games. I think the US license built it in past games as well, and I sincerely hope that they don't do it. As much as I appreciate the meme, it does weaken their industries. And one thing that's interesting is I'm watching the research tab for South Africa, and they are researching mechanized. That's not something you see often. They're skewered into they only have these 2 research slots that they can use. Obviously, you want to get your production efficiency up, so you want to get basic machine tools and all of that. And instead, South Africa has gone for Bren carriers, which the reason I find it curious is because traditionally, South Africa doesn't build its own motorized. Usually you get it lend-lease from the UK player, which should always have 2 factories on mechanized or motorized, pardon me. And they do have 1 factory on it. So I'm not sure where that mechanized rush is coming from. Australia, however, is a little more predictable. Oh, no, sorry, I was looking at the wrong nation. I meant New Zealand, who is, of course, researching heavy tanks themselves. And I think they're just going to go back to the Big Bob again.
Makes sense.
I have no idea why, but...
Also getting Valentines. Those are medium tanks. They're getting heavy tanks and mediums.
Lights, actually.
Sorry, lights and mediums, yeah.
Yeah, like the lights from Zobertus are not a surprise. He's done this every game so far. And I think that we're just going to see some time with light tanks again.
And against a mass assault Italy, that might actually be effective, because mass assault isn't the best against tanks.
Well, I'd say they're not the best against mediums and heavies, which obviously have a lot of breakthrough and soft attack, but light tanks do pack a little less of a punch. I'd say that light tanks are better against SFP or superior firepower or mobile warfare infantry, which tend to be a little weaker. But the key thing with mass assault is you usually have a lot more units, so you can cycle them into combat easier. And with things like guerrilla tactics, which make it more difficult for them to do organization damage to you. I'm not sure how effective the light tanks are going to be, especially not if he stacks entrenchment modifiers, which he probably will in his generals.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm kind of wondering here is whether South Africa is going to build the breakthrough divisions for the war in Africa, and then New Zealand will come in with the light tanks and just try to get in behind and then get the cut-offs that way, because then numbers don't matter.
That was their strategy in the first game, actually. They used the SAF heavy tanks. Traditionally, SAF, like we said before, they always build heavy tanks, or like 99% of the time. You use the SAF and usually French heavy tanks, I'm not sure if they're bringing in any others this game, to kind of hold back and or break the Germans on LLM, and then they use the light tanks to come in and Operation Compass, for those of you who don't know what that is, and just kind of push into Libya and encircle all the Italians. It worked for them the first time, but I'm not sure if this team is going to fall for it. I think that the mass assault Italy was a very conscious decision, and I'm afraid that we're going to see a lot of so-called roach divisions in Libya just waiting for them to try exactly that.
Just looking to see if anyone's starting to build aircraft yet, because one thing I would like to see is a bit more of a contention for Mediterranean, because so far it's just been an Axis ocean, which means that the Axis have no problem reinforcing their troops in Africa.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any aircraft yet. This is something that I personally called out as a mistake in the first two games. I noticed a lot of players building pre-war or interwar and fighter ones. Now, as much as it's useful to have numbers in the air, they get swatted like flies when they go up against fighter twos, and it seems like this UK player has learned from it. He's actually using the start of the game to build a lot of guns and AA and motorized, so that he has a stockpile while he's still one division training. And then the second he gets fighter twos, you're probably going to see him transition all his industry to fighter twos, so he can start booming those, and then he'll use the guns that he's built up in the early game, because equipment age when it comes to guns is not really that important. You just want to get divisions out. He'll use that to build the 20 with defensive shovels, and he'll use those to defend his island and probably North Africa and like the islands in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I very rarely build aircraft this early when doing multiplayer as well, for that reason. They're very weak compared to the aircraft you can get later on. Better to build guns.
Exactly. It was actually funny. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I had to laugh at it when I saw the interwar fighters being built. You don't often see players actually committing to the biplanes.
No.
Just witnessing it was actually pretty funny. At the moment, this is actually, I like this, smart decision. The Germans have decided to use their early industry to actually build Henkels, and they've already built quite a few of them, actually. I'm looking at 1,200 in reserve. That is not bad.
Wow, Italy's doing a lot of Navy infiltration at the moment. That's really interesting.